Howdy, I'm Sadie with the Awesome Orange, and today we're in my living room. I've got this really awkward section here that I haven't known what to do with until now. We are going to be building an L-shaped adjustable shelf bookshelf, and it's going to be awesome. Let me show you how I do it. A big thank you to Simpson Strong Tie for sponsoring this video. Okay, the start of this project is something I've been wanting to do, been waiting 8 years to do, and that's to remove the black railing that's here. I taped it off the saltillo tile and used a hacksaw to cut the metal railing out of it. It was pretty tedious work, but I felt this was the easiest way that I didn't ruin the tile rather than using a sawzall or grinder or something like that. Super satisfying. Then up next, it was time to rough cut the material. I'm using 2x10s construction grade lumber as the frame of this bookshelf. So I cut up all the rough dimensions and then I took it over to the planer to plane them down smooth and get any of the rough edges off of them. Then over at the table saw, I ripped the rounded over edges off to give them a more modern and square look. Was complete, I got my table saw sled out and we're going to cut some miters for the L shape. We're cutting a 45-degree angle here and it came out super smooth. For the long section of the bookshelf, this was a little tricky. I just had to make sure that I was pushing down enough to hold the weight of the longer boards, but it ended up working out great. And now we just need to join them together. I'm going to be using some dowels to do this. So I marked the location, set up my dowel jig, and started drilling. And with that done, let's glue these together. So I put some wood glue on there, put the dowels in, and then this part was a little tricky because I didn't have clamps long enough for them. So I tried all the tricks in the book, hammering them together, the clamps that I did have. I did end up using a strap clamp here later on for a second one. They did eventually come together really well. With everything cut out and the two L corners attached, it was time to move inside and get started on assembly. First, I needed to remove the baseboards. And I made sure to score the caulk so we don't tear the drywall, and then I used a trim puller so that I could reuse this piece of trim maybe somewhere else in my house. And now, let's put it together. This whole thing is going to be going together with some Simpson Strong Tie CVS interior wood screws. Hey, Oscar. And from this angle, you can see how awkward and small this corner is. I don't know if I should have assembled this in my shop or here, but it's going to be awkward either spot. So I got it all laid out, marked where I wanted the holes to go, added some wood glue, and I added some corner clamps here to hold everything in place while I drill and set the screws. I am pre-drilling just because I'm at the very edge of the piece, and then I countersink the screws slightly so we can fill them in later on. Did I already say how awkward it was installing this in my living room? Well, it was. I got it standing up and doing the same thing on the other end of the bookshelf. Clamp everything in place, glue, pre-drill, and screw it together. Super simple. All right, with the main frame assembled, I removed all those clamps, and now I'm marking where I'm going to be putting some of the uprights. Here in the corner, I'm going to be putting 2 uprights because when you see later how I'm going to be doing the adjustable shelf portion of it, I need these 2 pieces to attach the adjustable parts to. You'll see. So again, just pre-drilling and screwing those screws in. Okay, let's stand it up, put it in place. That was super satisfying. Next up, I need to add a back to the shorter section because this is going to back up to where my new entryway will be that I'll be working on down the road. So I cut out a piece of 1/8 inch hardboard, and then I went ahead and glued it and secured it with some brad nails temporarily, and then went back over and added screws to make sure it stays nice and tight on there. And then, because the piece wasn't exactly square, I did take my trim router back and make sure it was flush with the top of the bookshelf. All right, the part you've all been waiting for. How am I going to make the shelves adjustable? Well, we're going to be cutting out 4-inch strips of the 2x10s. This size could vary depending on the height of your bookshelf, and I'll leave more details on that in my blog post with a link in the description below. But we're cutting these out 2 at a time, making sure they're this exact same, and then I mark them. I'm being extra careful here, even though I have a stop block, because I ran into some issues of my stop block moving when I made a similar shelf to this. But anyway, we just keep cutting those 2 out, marking them, and cutting them out and marking them until we have enough for the entire bookshelf. After bringing them all inside, I did a test fit of some of them, and they were a little bit longer. The frame had been in my house for a while, and so it seems that they had shrunk and these hadn't. So I let those sit for a while, and I secured the frame to the wall using some of Simpson's corner brackets here into studs. And now, after a couple of days of letting the wood acclimate, I started installing them. So I installed them using 2 screws and wood glue, and then I use a 1 3/4 inch spacer, and then attach the next ones. Using the 1 3/4 inch spacer is going to give us slots to slide the bookshelves in and out of to arrange our bookshelf however we want, depending on the decor that we have. All right, let's keep going. Pre-drilling some more holes, add our glue, add our spacers, and then attach to the bookshelf frame. Move on to the other side. After installing each of the brackets, I would put a piece of wood and a level in between just to make sure everything was staying level and not getting moved around, and that my spacer was working properly. All right, hard part's over. Now let's make this thing look pretty. So I'm just using some spackling and filling in all of the countersunk holes and any cracks or seams that might be on the bookshelf. Then of course, lots of sanding. Luckily on the outside of the frame, I was able to use my orbital sander, but inside on the corners and the edges, I needed to hand sand those to get rid of the rough and sharp edges. Then time for tape. And caulk to fill in any of those tiny gaps between the frame and the wall. Did that on the sides, inside. I also did touch up the drywall texture on the bottom where I removed the baseboards. And then I used some tinted primer. Since this is raw wood, I wanted to make sure that I used a primer so that the paint went on super nice and evenly. Can you see it yet? What color should I paint it? Well, after priming, I did go ahead and resand and touch up any nooks and crannies that might have still needed some more spackling, and then it was time for paint. And of course, I went with my Old Faithful black, tricorn black from Sherwin-Williams. This was a tedious process because I used a 4-inch roller and a brush and trying to get in all those nooks and crannies. It wasn't too bad, but it took a little bit of time. I could have sprayed it, but I was afraid I might get too many runs. So this worked out great with a couple of coats of paint. And now we need to make some shelves to go inside. So back to the wood shop I went and milled up some 8/4 alder. and I barely had just enough scraps to make all the shelves I needed, but I ended up having to glue all the boards together similar to a tabletop and then cutting them down over at the table saw, so we barely had any waste, and it worked out perfectly. If you're not already subscribed, make sure you do that now so you don't miss my next awesome build. All right, over to the table saw to get those individual shelves cut out. They're just shy of 9 inches to fit into the bookshelf with a little bit of wiggle room. I sanded them to 120 grit and then went over them with a wire wheel on my restorer. I did this to add some texture to the pieces. I just think it gives it some really good character. And there you can see up close the texture that I put on it. And now, my new bookshelf. I absolutely love it how the shelves are adjustable to fit my decor needs or when they change. And here it is from the entryway, which we'll be making over later on down the road. But I absolutely love how this turned out. I'm not the best at styling shelves, but I can move the shelves around and it can grow with me as I get better. So what do you think? Tell me in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, build loud, build wild, and have an awesome day.